Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb with Lake Ann Camp. We are trying something new today. Brand new video podcast. This is something that I see on YouTube all the time, but we've never actually tried it. So bear with us. This is, again, the first time doing this. And so we're going to kind of just go along with this and see what happens. But with me today, I have Jake Cross. He is with the guest services, and I'll let him talk more about what he does in just a second. But he's been with the camp for 5 years. Is that correct?
Yep.
5 years, okay. And then 10 summers. So 5 full years and then 10 summers doing what you're doing now, correct?
Yep. This will be my 10th summer.
Awesome. So maybe just introduce yourself. Tell us kind of how you found out about the camp, how you came to the camp, and then we'll get into what we're going to talk about today.
Cool. Yeah, like you said, my name is Jake. I was born and raised in Peru, Indiana. That is actually the circus city capital of the world.
I'm glad you said that because
yeah.
I was going to bring it up if you didn't.
Clown Town, as we like to call it. So basically, I never stood a chance. I was born to be weird. So I actually started going to camp as soon as I possibly could. My home church that I grew up in, East Point Bible Church, they always brought us. And it was a super important thing in my life. From the first summer, I was like sold out for camp.
Did you come to Lake Ann the whole time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, always Lake Ann camp.
Okay. So that's how you found out about it. Did you have like a aspiration to work here one day, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so I think it was in junior high. My mom came up as like a chaperone,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody that worked here at the time took her out for ice cream at Moomer's, the local ice
Of
cream
course,
shop.
right? Yep.
Yep. And he had mentioned that they had positions for high schoolers to work.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom came back to me and she was like, "You're doing that." Like it wasn't an option.
Sounds
She's
like
like,
a good mom.
you're gonna apply and you're gonna go."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
So I did it. I was excited about it, and that it was like an amazing summer.
Yeah.
I came in 2012, not really knowing what I was getting into. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do this every summer."
Okay.
It was fantastic.
So did you have kind of that service mindset, service attitude all the way growing up? And so was it a natural progression you get into this kind of thing?
Yeah, so after my first summer of working here, I was like, I am going to work there full time
Mm-hmm.
someday. That was my dream.
Yeah.
So I worked here on cleaning crew for 3 summers. Shout out to the cleaning crew. And then I did High Adventure in 2015. That was awesome. That was probably one of the best summers I had. Um, and then I kind of wanted to do the internship. I was a little bit too young for that at the
Okay.
time. I was like fresh out of high school. It's a college level internship. So instead, I went home. And then it was like, honestly, I never thought I'd be at Lake Ann Camp ever again.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a miracle. God worked it out for me to come back on
Yeah.
full-time staff. But it was always my dream to work here.
That's awesome. So one of the things that we're going to start doing is putting out kind of a comment section in the podcast to say, what kind of topic should we bring up next? Probably about 3 weeks ago, you came to me and said, "Hey, I have a cool topic that I'd like to talk about if you have a chance to do that." So today we're going to do that. We're going to talk about a little bit about your background, some of the struggles that you had, and I know some of that, but I'm interested to hear and excited to hear kind of where God has brought you from to be today. So let's dive right in. We're going to talk about, I think, the cost of sin is, I think, the best way to put this. So do you want to kind of just start with maybe your testimony and kind of tell us some of that?
Mm-hmm. So I already said I was born in Peru, Indiana. Growing up, I was actually homeschooled, if you can't tell. So that was great. No problem with homeschooling. But I guess it kind of lays the groundwork for the main part of my testimony that I want to talk about. Going through high school, I was always very much, I don't want to say like a goody two-shoes, but it was very important for me. Like I was the kid, if you watched like an R-rated movie at a party, I was going to tell our parents about it. Like,
Right.
I was like, I'm not doing that.
You were one of those.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
I was like very much like that growing up. And there were so many things that I was like looking at other people like, "Pfft, I would never do that." That was a like common theme in my life. I would never do that. I didn't have like a ton of friends. I had a couple people that I would consider like good friends, but really kind of a lonely upbringing. I'm very close with my dad. My dad is one of my best friends, so shout out to him.
Still to this day.
Still one of my best
Yeah.
friends. He's coming up in a couple weeks. We're gonna go see the new Godzilla movie together. Like, so
Very cool.
one of my good friends.
That's great.
But other than that, not a lot of friends my own age. So when I graduated high school, instead of going to college, I actually had applied for college at, I think it's now Summit University. I got in, but I needed a job in the meantime. So I ended up getting a really good job at a factory in my town, making like really good money, especially for straight out of high school. So I opted for that instead of college. Once I got there, I ended up making some friends at this place that were doing a lot of the things that I said I would never do that, right? So I started hanging out with these people, and I found a closeness with these guys that I had never found with anybody else. The way that they treated me, the way that they welcomed me and accepted me, it was just something I had never felt before, and it was almost like I was addicted to it. Like I loved it. And these guys are living like the party lifestyle. And when I first started hanging out with them, I would do things like, just for example, I don't want to get into like extreme detail about a lot of this stuff,
Sure.
but let's just use like drinking beer as an example. Like I had never drank beer. I didn't like the taste of beer. I remember they gave it to me and I was like, this is disgusting. But I kind of made myself drink it as a peer pressure thing.
Yeah, I think that's normal.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like all of these things that I was like, I would never do that. I found myself doing because I found this acceptance that I felt that I had been lacking for a long time. So in that, it kind of was a snowball effect. Before I knew it, like I remember one day being at work and being like, man, I would really like a beer. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't even like beer.
Right.
But all of a sudden I wanted it.
Right.
And then it became a snowball effect of the things that I said I would never do. Suddenly they were normal parts of my life. I was doing them on a daily basis. So now this thing's just normal that I said I would never do. So then it started, I would move on to the next thing and the next thing. And it was just like this downhill snowball effect that just led to
Could you see it happening? Like, did you know it was happening, or did you kind of look back and at one day and be like, "Wow, I've like really gone far."
It definitely, I did not see it happening. There were obviously times where I would feel guilt and shame, but it was such a slow process that there was a day where I hit rock bottom, and I looked back and realized how far I had come.
Yeah.
Like how far down I had fallen.
Yeah. So what was that rock bottom point? Where did you decide that this wasn't for me, or what, I shouldn't be doing this anymore kind of thing?
Yeah, so I had bought my own house, and it kind of became like a party central, right? So I made a lot of very poor financial decisions. I was spending all my time and money partying, doing stuff with my friends, just having a good, what I thought was a good time. And then as time went on, I ended up getting laid off from my job. That factory closed, and I didn't even change my lifestyle at all. I was still spending money, still partying. I didn't even look for another job for a long time.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where the two guys that lived with me, they ended up having to move out because I had said, I can't even afford to live here anymore. Like, I need help. And they left. And the house ended up being like practically empty.
Yeah.
And so I remember like sitting in this empty house all alone and realizing like I was miserable. And then my grandpa came and surprised me one day. He picked me up, didn't give me an option. He said, we're going to go get breakfast. And like, I'll never forget that. He took me to breakfast and he basically just laid into me for 45 minutes. He was like, look at your life. He was like, look at how you're living. He's like, you're not even the same person. I don't even know you anymore. And I realized I broke down in tears, and I realized that I didn't even know myself anymore. It's like, what am I doing? And there was never a point where I like said, I don't believe in God. I don't think God exists, but I was choosing to ignore him. And at that moment, he showed me that. He was like, you got to come back.
Yeah.
Like, look how miserable you are.
I think anybody that has gone through anything like that gets to a point where it's not a denial of God in their life, but it's a I don't want to do it right now. Having a relationship with God is work, and
Hmm.
just like any relationship, and there's effort that you have to put forward, and it's sometimes just easier not to do that. But then you get into situations like you were in, and all of a sudden you realize that all of the things that I thought were important, all the friends that I thought I had, aren't there anymore. And now it's like, well, what do I do now?
Hmm.
Thank God for your grandpa, right?
Yep, yep.
That's fantastic.
And my parents too. I mean, the whole time my parents were always, they knew what was going on. They're
Hmm.
not oblivious. They were telling me, and I was choosing to ignore them as well. But luckily, I had that strong support system that
Hmm.
was there to help me.
So when you had that conversation with your grandfather, I'm assuming it wasn't the next day change kind of thing. Was it a gradual kind of
Hmm.
progression to change your lifestyle and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was definitely gradual. It was not instantly like, oh, I'm a great Christian again. There were a lot of, honestly, like addictions,
Hmm.
I would say, that I had to overcome. And it actually took a lot of hard work. I mean, like I said, I have a strong support system in my parents, so I actually moved back in with them.
Hmm.
We decided we were going to sell my house. I was going to move in a whole different direction in my life, and it was not easy. I mean, I still hung out with those friends.
Sure.
Um, yeah, it was very gradual.
Yeah.
It was not
Yeah.
instantaneous at all.
So as you started working your way back, did you end up going back to church? Were you
Hmm.
reading books, things? Like what was happening during that process? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started going back to church. That was probably the biggest part. I didn't go to church for like 2 years.
Hmm.
Um, and it was amazing, like going back and hearing the sermons. It was like they touched my life in a completely different way than they ever had before,
Hmm.
because I experienced what it's like to live apart from God. Um, and then a lot of prayer, confession, having to actually feel like I was getting my relationship back, like
Hmm.
rebuilding my relationship with God.
Right.
There's infinite grace. Um, but sometimes it doesn't feel like that,
Mm.
with the guilt that you feel. So, um, I guess feeling worthy of being in God's presence again,
Sure.
I never felt that way.
Yeah. So what was your progression in kind of finding that forgiveness? Because you did find it.
Mhm.
So what kind of steps did you take? What did you do to get yourself to understand that there is that grace there, and again, going back to that relationship, there's work there. So what were some things that you used, maybe scriptures you had,
Mhm.
that kind of helped you along that process?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that helped me is understanding grace.
Hmm.
So there's basically, when I was living in sin consistently, I knew that grace was a thing and I kind of took advantage of that, right?
Hmm.
But when you fully understand what grace is, it completely changes how you live your life. And I'll just give like an analogy to start this off because I'm kind of a simple minded person. So, like, analogies are big for me. I mean, sometimes, to be honest, I forget my kids' birthdays. I'm just going to be honest.
In
But
case
I
you
can.
didn't hear that, he forgets his kid's birthdays, just in case.
But I can remember like an analogy my
Sure.
pastor used when I was 8.
Yeah.
So my grandma used to sell this like health product,
Hmm.
and it came in a bottle, and you took it like by the ounce. And this stuff was like super expensive. It was like $80 for a bottle.
Hmm.
So my dad's friend ended up buying a bottle, put it in his fridge, comes home after work, and it's all gone. So his teenage son had gone in, didn't know what it was, opened it up, and he drank the whole thing, right?
Hmm.
And his dad was like livid. He's like, I spent $80 on this. But the kid didn't know. He didn't understand the price.
Hmm.
So he just drank it, right? So me, I kind of relate that when I was living in sin, I knew that grace existed and I knew it was infinite, but I didn't really put the time into thought and time and thought into what it cost, right? So like if that kid had known how much that bottle costs, he probably wouldn't have drank it.
Sure.
So when you understand the cost, Jesus died for our sins. the torture that he underwent, when you think about that, it shouldn't have the effect of, I'm going to continue to take advantage of it. It should change your life, and I don't want to take advantage of it. And a verse that's really big for me is Romans 6. I have it memorized, but I'm just going to read it because I'll mess it up. It says, "What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin so that grace may increase?" And then to pause there, I like how it's phrased. It says, "So that grace may increase." That really shows that grace is infinite. So when we sin, we're not depleting grace, but actually causing it to increase. I just like that wording. May it never be. How shall we who died to sin still live in it? So that was like a really big thing for me, is understanding the grace of God, and not wanting to take advantage of that anymore.
Yeah.
And then some practical steps. These are basic things, but I think they're very important things. I mean, it's the stuff that you learn in church. Like, we got to read our Bible every day. It's praying every day. Going to church. I mean, these things are important. Like, skipping out on that stuff will really cause you to slip back into sin. But it's not just doing the act, it's doing it in the Holy Spirit. So you're walking with God.
Yeah.
Like, when I'm reading my Bible and doing my devotions, it's not just something to check off the list. This is an active thing that I am doing with God. I'm growing with Him. And I want to live in the Spirit and not in the flesh. Those two things are at odds with each other.
Yeah. During this process that you were going through this, when you started going back to church, did you find people that were in the similar boat that you were in? Or was there like a kindred kind of spirit there? Or were you kind of isolated and not really, you were on your own kind of thing?
Yeah, when I went back to church, honestly, I felt like really dirty. And I felt like I had hurt a lot of those people. I mean, I grew up with most of these people
Yeah.
in that church. So it was really hard for me to connect when I was in my hometown, just because I felt like I'd really hurt these people. And they had been reaching out to me too during this whole time when I wasn't at church. And that's not on them. I didn't really connect when I went back while I was in Peru. And that was more because I was still working through things. And I just felt like super guilty about it, and like I had hurt them. It wasn't until I actually moved to Michigan and made connections here that I kind of had that sort of healing process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I know there's almost that sense or that, feeling of shame when you have strayed, and then, we use that word strayed like a stray dog kind of thing. When you stray and then you come back, but like you said, that grace is always there. And I've found, because maybe not to the extent that you have, but I've been in those spots before where, you know, you just get away from what you know is right to something that's easy, and that easiness is often, leads to other parts of sin that come into your life and that kind of thing. And so, you go back and you're like, man, you feel guilty, you don't feel like you belong. The people that you thought were your friends, they're, you feel like they're almost looking at you side-eyed, like, are you sure he's back to normal and doing what he's supposed to do, and that kind of thing. So, it's interesting to go through that process, but it's important to know that you didn't do it alone. You had, that support group with you and that kind of thing. So you mentioned a verse that you used. You have a book here with you. What's the book that you read that kind of helped you as well through that process?
So this book is actually called Killing Sin Habits. It's Conquering Sin with Radical Faith by Stuart Scott. This is a super helpful book. It talks about like breaking the cycle of sin. There's a cycle that, people typically go through, and it's kind of throwing a cog in the machine of that cycle and stopping it, right wherever you're at in that cycle.
Yeah.
That's a super helpful resource that I would recommend to anybody who's struggling with sin.
Yeah. Well, Jake, thank you so much for being here. It's important, I think, for people to see that what you went through, and probably what a lot of them are going through, is not out of the ordinary. And God uses people like that all the time. I mean, you can see it throughout Scripture. Moses and David and Saul turned to Paul, and all of it. You see it through Scripture, and I think that's just a reminder that God gives us that, you're not alone, and this is a process. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Hopefully this video turns out. If it doesn't, we still have the audio to put up there. But thank you for joining us today, and I can't wait to see you next week.